Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton of HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Welcome to February, where it's 75 degrees here at my office in Wilmington, North Carolina. So this is the February 1st, 2016 edition. Happy Monday to you. Let's take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies for today and as we start off the month here of February. Notice, if you've been paying attention to these video blogs here for the last several months, the El Nino definitely starting to lose its luster just a little bit. Every single week that goes by, a little bit more heat starts to dwindle away, and the El Nino will fade off and ride into the sunset before too long. I'm almost sure of it. And it's still holding on, though. We're still seeing some effects from it globally, honestly. It's hard to get into the details of that in a discussion like this, but when you have this much warm water compared to where it should be over such a vast area of the ocean, it definitely affects the short-term climate or weather patterns, whichever way you want to look at it. Now, looking at the pressure pattern in the Pacific real quick, the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, we ended January pretty negative here, minus 21, and that's a pretty steep drop. So there was definitely, the atmosphere was much more conducive to holding on to that El Nino above the ocean than you would think for something that's supposed to start dwindling here fairly soon. But if we look at the subsurface, we can see what's going on, that there are all kinds of forces at work here that are going to shape this over the next several weeks and months. This goes back to the end of the hurricane season here, the 29th of November, and we had this large pool of cold water starting to assemble, if you will, in the western Pacific at the subsurface. And then this very large, massive area of warmer than normal water. And you can see here, just looking at these orange colors here, 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above average, all the way over to basically the west coast of South America over here. And in some cases, close to 4 degrees Celsius in what we call the Nino 1.2 region, roughly. Basically, by the time we got to December, the El Nino was reaching its peak, and we had very, very warm water, almost to record levels in some areas, and actually in some areas it did eclipse some of the records. And so, it was a big deal. But now, at the end of January here, and I highlighted this to make sure you saw that, this is the latest, and you can clearly see this has become much more fractured. The warm anomalies have shrunk away just a little bit. And I think more importantly is this very large area of cold is starting to really take root. And some of these colors in here, these blues, we're getting down to 4 to 5 degrees Celsius below average. And that's a big contrast to the very warm, almost plus 5 above average in the east. And it's just a matter of time when the easterlies start to get stronger coming this way that we start to erode this more and the cold water can take over, and we should be close to, if not in a La Nina pattern by the time we get into August, September, October. That's what most of the models show. Looking back at this map again in the Atlantic, a little bit of a cooling in the tropical Atlantic right now with a very strong high pressure area, positive North Atlantic oscillation for the most part, driving pretty strong easterly winds through here, keeping things mixed up. And it's still pretty warm right off the coast of Africa. And then a little bit of cooling here in the western Atlantic and parts of the Gulf as storminess has become the norm off and on here as of late. Storms coming across Florida, cutting up the east coast. We're going to hack away at some of these positive anomalies, but once we get to hurricane season in June, water temperatures, of course, will be plenty warm, and it'll be more of a matter of how the atmosphere, with shear and instability and things like that, come into play. But it's interesting to look at things now. And just as a note, most of the long-range sea surface temperature modeling still indicates that this region through here, the main development region, will be roughly at or slightly above, and in some cases a couple of degrees Celsius above the long-term average. I'll have to pull that up one day and give it a look as we get closer to the season here. Only a few months away now that we're into February, so it won't be long before some of this stuff starts to matter. more and more. Looking at actual sea surface temperatures, this is what really impresses me. The 26-degree isotherm Celsius, which is about 79.5 degrees Fahrenheit, still resides right in here, into the Gulf of Mexico, and into the Straits of Florida, and then just off of the southern tip of Florida here, off of Miami and the Florida Keys. And then right inside of that, poking up through the Yucatan Channel, 27 Celsius, which is about 81 Fahrenheit. So we still have very warm water in the southeast Gulf of Mexico, although I think this is going to start to get chipped at just a little bit, chipped away like a jackhammer, really. I do see the beginnings of some very cold air maybe working its way down with some strong frontal boundaries in the next several weeks, so that this will probably erode away some before it naturally starts to bounce back in March as the sun does its magic and warms up the oceans very slowly. You can also see the very cold, relative to this, shelf water through here, even Lake Pontchartrain here. And if you're doing Mardi Gras festivities in and around New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, be careful. Don't go in the water. It's a little chilly. You might need a wetsuit. In fact, I would highly recommend it. In the Atlantic, the western Atlantic anyway, getting a pretty strong temperature gradient. The difference between temperature over distance, we call that a temperature gradient. And it's pretty steep right now, pretty strong. You're starting to see these sort of pixelated blackish colors coming in, meaning that the isotherms, the lines of equal temperatures, can't, there's not a high enough resolution map to really zoom in and discern that. So you're starting to see them really come together here, which is an indication of a steep gradient. But let's look closer. Let's see if I can zoom in. No, this is zoomed naturally as far as it'll go. I'll have to artificially zoom in a little bit, blow the picture up. So look, this is about 24 degrees Celsius, so, the mid-70s, and there's 25 Celsius. 24 is low to mid-70s, 25 is getting into the mid to upper 70s, and that's just off the southeast coast, and it bends away a little bit from the mid-Atlantic states, and this water up here is a little colder than it should be, and look, I can show you that. Let's examine that just for a moment. Well, look at that. It actually changed some. It made a liar out of me. Tiny little area of below normal right there. But I tell you, a few days ago it was colder. I guess some of the warmer water has moved back in from the western Atlantic. But basically what I'm getting at is when we do have another winter storm, and it's just a matter of time, plenty of very warm water, especially here off the Carolinas, for cyclogenesis, the birth of a cyclone, a tropical system in the summer, a non-tropical or extratropical mid-latitude storm in the winter. Lots of fuel for those, and we're probably going to have a very cold outbreak as we move into February. Not the next few days, I'll show you that in a moment, but it's ripe for the picking down here for the I-95 corridor into the Appalachians to have another big snowstorm, maybe a powerful nor'easter or two, before all is said and done, February and March, as we get into spring. Not too far away. Speaking of big storms, I wanted to show you this. Not often do I get a chance to talk about European weather. This is a great map. The Atlantic Surface Analysis, coming in from the NOAA Ocean Service, the Ocean Prediction Center. And this shows what they refer to, from some of the European countries over here, as Storm Henry. All right, they name their big winter storms or ocean storms more as a public service. I don't think any one corporation does it like the Weather Channel does here in the United States for winter storms. So this is called Storm Henry, and check out that pressure right there. That's not a typo. 945 millibars, hurricane force winds in here. This is the northern part of the British Isles. This is Ireland. And then you have the northwest coast of Europe here, Norway and Sweden. And then this is the North Sea. And folks, this thing is headed into this general direction over here. The Shetland Islands up here are going to clip the northern part of the United Kingdom and into the North Sea. A very, very powerful storm. You can only imagine what kind of wave heights are out there. And, you know, the North Sea oil interest, that's going to be incredible. They're talking about it a lot here in Europe, of course. I just wanted to point it out to you. It's pretty impressive how this has developed. And I don't know the exact origins of it. Maybe the leftovers from what was the winter storm that the Weather Channel named Jonas, but I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. I haven't gone back to trace the origins of this storm, but it's very, very impressive, and impressive enough that the hurricane hunters from NOAA are going to go and fly this and do some research out there. I saw that on Twitter this morning. Couldn't believe it. So, you know, that's pretty good that they're going to do some North Atlantic superstorm, and this is a superstorm. That's incredible. 945. I mean, you get down to Category 4 hurricanes with that kind of a pressure over the tropics. And it's a very, very large wind field, as you can see in here. I'm impressed by this. I thought I would show it to you. Get ready. You probably know all about it if you're over here in northwestern Europe and in especially the northern British Isles. It's coming for you. Storm Henry. All right, looking at the lower 48 weather, a lot has been made about the blizzard conditions here in Iowa, where the important Iowa caucuses. In fact, I heard a national radio station news report. I won't name who it is, just for, you know, to keep the peace. The reporter said that the blizzard was striking fear into the minds of some of the older caucus voters. I just thought that was very inappropriate, that the weather should not be fearful if you know about it. And I think people in Iowa who are used to blizzards, and even the old timers that they were talking about are going to be definitely used to blizzards, or, you know, B, not going to be fearful of it. I have to call BS on that nobody's going to be fearful of it because they're Iowans. I mean, they're used to this kind of stuff. I just thought that was bad. You know, when you make the weather out to be a monster, you know, when you get a Katrina or something like that, it's time to call out all the adjectives you can get to motivate people to prepare. But this is a run-of-the-mill blizzard for this area, and it struck me the wrong way, as you can tell. But so the reality is, yes, there's blizzard warnings for northwestern Iowa, and this will all start to lift out soon enough. And by tomorrow, once everything really starts to wrap up in the evening and anybody needs to get out to New Hampshire, things should start to get better. But look at what's going on here in the larger picture. Southwest United States, the Four Corners region especially, and Colorado as a whole here, just going to have an incredible amount of snow. Very strong winds coming in here to the Southern California region, so just a mess roughly west of the Mississippi in here. And to the east, warm temperatures, foggy in the mornings, and even through the day along the Gulf Coast here. Cold water relative to average, or relative to the air temperature, not necessarily below average, and then you have very warm water leads to this fog. Lake Pontchartrain, a big issue with that I was reading earlier. And so if we look at the GFS over the next several days, this is the current map. Keep your eye, here's Iowa, right here, okay? And here's the storm system still organizing over the Rockies. And over time, it moves into Iowa. There you go, strong northerly, or strong winds on the north side, northeast winds, easterly winds cutting through there. Yep, blizzard conditions for sure. More so in Nebraska, Omaha, I think it's called Kearney. Hopefully I said it right. Blizzard conditions for several hours. But look what happens. This moves on through by tomorrow evening. If we scroll up, we can look at the time frame. Late tomorrow night, the conditions will start to improve, especially here in the eastern half of Iowa. And then we have to look at the possibility of severe weather down south, Mississippi, parts of Alabama, Tennessee. And this system moves on through. Very warm temperatures, very wet along the I-95 corridor. Severe weather possible. Some of these are linear storm sections, you know, like a line of thunderstorms. Not too much evidence of bow echoes, which would be indicative of strong winds. But the threat of wind damage and hail along parts of this front certainly going to be there over the next few days. The front moves offshore and cold air starts to spill in. I'm only going out to 7 days here, but watch what happens towards the end of the forecast time here. This is the 32-degree line, and very cold air is going to spill out of Canada right across the North Pole, what we call cross-polar flow. And just a fancy way of saying it's going to be darn cold as we get through February. Let me see where my time frame is here. This is a huge map. We're only at 99 hours, so I've got a few more frames to go here. So each morning it gets progressively colder in the east, and then here comes that cold air. And then right at the end of the time frame here, this is day 7. So a week from today, a week from Monday, another storm tries to start to develop here along the Carolina coast. We've got to watch that. Remember I told you about the warm water. And then we have Arctic air trying to make an invasion into the lower 48 here. That cross-polar flow going to come down and likely drive a front down through the Yucatan Channel as that happens. So very cold air and probably a stormy pattern. May have to do an update later in the week as we see what happens with this little feature and if the other models start to pick up on it. Speaking of storms, as I wrap things up here, marginal at best to just general thunderstorms today in parts of Missouri, Oklahoma, southern Kansas, and extreme northern Texas. Tomorrow, a bigger threat, more of an enhanced threat. They've added a few more categories here. And really, this is important because it's going to affect the deep south, the areas that have quite a marked tornado history in the last several years. I don't think it's going to be awful like we saw, for example, in 2011. Not nearly the same parameters, but do keep your eyes out and ears to this area. If you look at the different categories here, see if it'll show me. Probabilistic for severe weather in general, within 25 miles of a point. Again, just another way of saying, basically, if you're in the yellow and red, you have a pretty good chance of seeing some severe weather, and especially in the red. So check the SPC Storm Prediction Center site tomorrow for the specific information then as they talk about threats for tornadoes and hail and wind damage in this region, and especially down here in the heart of Dixie. And then by day 3, that front lags across the southeast into the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida Panhandle, southeast Alabama, where a marginal setup for severe weather exists, and probably have some general thunderstorms moving through. And then we have to see that old saying, as they say, I'm trying to remember what the best way to frame this, that if it storms in the winter within 10 days to 2 weeks, it usually snows or something like that. Well, we might have some thunderstorms here in the southeast up to the mid-Atlantic. And then remember what I showed you on the old GFS there, a week out, the beginnings of maybe a powerful coastal storm. We'll have to wait and see. Interesting, a little cliffhanger there. All right, well, we covered a lot today. Thanks for tuning in, from the tropics to what we look at for next hurricane season, through the storm affecting Europe, and then the severe weather and snow threat, blizzard conditions in parts of Iowa, etc. We covered it all, so appreciate you tuning in. I am Mark Settle for HurricaneTrack.com, and this has been the February 1st edition of the off-season hurricane outlook and discussion. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you next Monday, if not sooner, as we watch and see what happens with the potential for another coastal storm. And if that doesn't come to fruition and it doesn't show up in the models any longer, I'll talk to you again next Monday.